Oke, selamat malam untuk teman-teman. Hari ini mungkin tidak banyak yang hadir, tapi saya yakin nanti akan banyak yang nonton dari IGTV. Eh, jadi teman-teman, seperti yang sudah teman-teman lihat di Twitter, di Instagram, kalian udah lihat bahwa kita akan melangsungkan diskusi mengenai animisme. Ini topik yang sangat menarik karena basically sebenarnya sangat jarang orang yang membahas soal animisme. Nah, hari ini untuk membahas soal animisme, kita mengundang salah seorang dosen di filsafat UI, Pak Tiddy Smith. Thank you Pak Tiddy for your willingness. Pak
Yes.
Tiddy, Pak Tiddy graduated from Otago University in New Zealand, if I'm not wrong, his Ph.D. With his thesis about science and religion, uh, the methods of science and religion, epistemologies in conflict, which already been published. Meskipun di Indonesia ini susah untuk dapatnya ya. So it's hard to get the book in Indonesia. Hopefully someday we have the book, The Methods of Science and Religion, Epistemologies in Conflict, which was written in 2019. Is it true? 2019?
Well, published in 2019.
Published,
yes.
Published in 2019. And also, for today's discussion, we will discuss Pak Tiddy Smith paper in Australasian journal of philosophy, which titled "The Common Consent Argument for the Existence of Nature Spirits," or explicitly, argument for animism. Am I right? Argument for animism, yeah. Arguments for animism. And yeah, tanpa berlama-lama lagi, kita langsung aja discuss. Pak Tiddy, before we discussing our your writings, I want first to ask you the first questions that we usually ask for the interviewees is the first, what makes you into philosophy for the first time, and what do you think is philosophy?
Oh, okay. The second question is much harder than the first. So the first question is easy to answer, but the answer might be a little bit odd. I was, as a young teenager, very into music. I played in bands. I particularly enjoyed punk music. And I heard that a lot of punk music was related to this idea called anarchism.
I see.
And I thought, what is this anarchism thing? And what are all the punks talking about? So I went to the library as a young teenage boy, looking for books about anarchism, because I wanted to understand what all the punks were on about. And so after looking through a few different varieties of theories about what anarchism was, and getting sort of deeper into both the philosophy of economics and political philosophy, I realized that it was a very rich and fertile thing to investigate. So when I went to university, I actually began studying political philosophy, so politics, philosophy, and economics. But halfway through my degree, I realized that my maths was far too horrible for economics, and that, political philosophy and politics and political science became a bit boring, I think, and pure philosophy became just much more interesting, and that's where I stayed ever after. Now, the second question, what is philosophy?
Yeah, what is philosophy?
For me.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's lots of fun. But I think if I were to give a definition of what I think philosophy is or what it does, I think philosophy is really just when common sense breaks.
When common sense breaks.
When common sense, when apa masuk akal itu rusak. So when we reason from some very ordinary premises that we all believe. The next thing we know, we have a paradox or a contradiction. And how did we get there? It's very confusing because all of our premises were common sense. So I think that philosophy, as I understand it, is really when common sense breaks down.
Mm.
And philosophers try to fix it again.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Usually they fail, but I
Mm.
think that's what's going on.
Okay, interesting. I'll translate it in Indonesia ya.
Thank you. Yes.
Ya, jadi menarik sekali teman-teman karena Pak Tiddy Smith ini justru bertemu dengan filsafat ketika dia mengenal musik gitu ya. Someone's asked you, what instruments do you play, Pak?
Well, I play guitar, and I used to play a bit of bass guitar, and I sing, or something like that, but I can't drum at all. Impossible.
Well, it's really interesting because a lot of people start philosophy from books, but you started from music and anarchism. It's really interesting. Dan kan teman-teman, apa sih filsafat itu buat Pak Tiddy Smith ketika yang namanya common sense itu semacam nalar umum ya. Nalar umum itu hancur. Jadi kita mulai menggunakan atau berusaha untuk berpikir secara lebih mendalam. Kurang lebih seperti itu sepertinya. When common sense break down, that's the time when we start to philosophizing. Pak Tiddy Smith. Okay, right. Thank you. Interesting one. Interesting this definition. Okay, now let's talk about the animism that you write in your paper. What makes you want to discuss animism, which we could agree that animism is nowadays a less known religion than the other bigger religions such as Christianity or Islam or Buddhism. But what makes you into animism?
Well, I didn't want to write about animism. First, I didn't want to. It was an accident. Now, what happened was I was looking at common consent arguments for the existence of God. And what I tried to do was change the arguments a little bit. So I wanted to see what the strongest argument that you could summon from common consent for some religious position would be. And I wanted to know whether this argument would support Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, whatever, right? I didn't know when I started what it would support. And eventually I realized, it will support animism. Okay, I'm going to have to write quite a lot about animism. Because it seems to me from the argument that to me the argument seems so strong that I felt that it was the best answer to the question, if any religion is true, which one? Or if any kind of religion is true, what type? And that's when I realized, oh no, animism actually has a very strong claim to make here. And I looked and looked through the philosophical literature for more discussions of animism because I thought I had just missed it. But it's not there. There isn't any.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I got quite upset about this because I thought this was very unfair to the animists. There is so much discussion in contemporary philosophy of religion about theism and virtually nothing about animism. And I felt that this was a terrible situation. It's also kind of a bit yucky or a bit distasteful in a post-colonial context, right? So I thought this had to be fixed. So philosophers have to start talking about animism.
I see. Okay. Yeah. I agree. Maybe J.L. Schellenberg writing about ultimism, that I think that's difference. Schellenberg ultimism, it's difference from animism, ya, Pak Tiddy, ya. Yeah. Could you define what is animism actually? What kind of belief it is?
So,
Animism.
unfortunately, it's quite difficult to define animism in a way that characterizes or brings together all of the beliefs that these very separate, isolated religious communities share. One of the most promising options was put forward by a man called Irving Halliwell in the 1930s, I think. And his conception of animism was as a world full of persons, only some of whom are human. So the animist conceives of a world in which the idea of personhood is broader than what we say most modern Western societies accept. Other conceptions differ, obviously. There are some who refuse to define animism as any kind of belief at all. So some would define it as the lived experience of being alive to a world that is constantly in birth or new from one moment to the rest. But I don't think those kinds of definitions are very helpful.
I'll translate it first ya, Pak. Oke, jadi menurut Pak Tiddy Smith ini, sebenarnya dia nggak mau nulis tentang animisme nih, teman-teman, pertama-tama. Tapi ketika dia membaca sebuah argumen yang namanya the common consent arguments, nanti kita akan bahas ini, common consent arguments, dia menemukan bahwa ternyata common consent arguments ini lebih mendukung di antara segala agama yang ada, melainkan animisme gitu. Jadi di antara semua agama yang ada, justru animisme ini yang paling kuat untuk didukung oleh common consent arguments. Nanti kita akan tanya apa itu common consent arguments. Dan kedua, apa sih animisme? Animisme ini adalah kepercayaan bahwa yang namanya kemanusiaan atau personhood itu nggak terbatas pada diri manusia, tapi bahkan lebih luas daripada sekedar manusia. Nah, jadi kurang lebih begitu teman-teman. Kalau teman-teman tadi kurang mendapat. Oke. We'll go on for the another questions ya, Pak Tiddy Smith. You talk about these common consent arguments that you think justify or supporting for animism. What is this common consent argument?
Okay, so I'll start at the beginning, and then maybe if there is a question, we can pause and continue on. Okay, so to begin with, there's a very old argument for the existence of God. And that argument is called the common consent argument. Sometimes it's called consensus Gentium. Now, this argument is very, very simple. It just says, well, pretty much everyone believes in God, right? So, God exists. That's the argument, right? So this was a very popular argument in the ancient world, particularly in the Epicurean and Stoic circles. But in the modern era, it's not very popular at all. And I think we can see why, right? The argument isn't particularly convincing, I think, but perhaps you disagree. But we know that the majority of people can be wrong from time to time. And so simply saying, well, a very large majority believe in God, therefore God exists. Obviously, it's not a valid argument. And we might wonder about how sound it is, given how different the conceptions of God are worldwide. So that's the first part. So we should start there. Do you want to say something, Samuel? Maybe you can translate at that point.
Oh ya, I will translate it first. Jadi teman-teman, common consent argument ini argumen yang udah zaman dahulu banget gitu, dari zaman Yunani kuno bahkan. Sederhananya, argumen ini percaya bahwa karena sebagian orang percaya Tuhan, maka Tuhan ada. Itu. Nah, memang di dalam paper ini Pak Tiddy Smith juga menuliskan itu tidak convincing. Nah, that's why di dalam tulisan ini juga dia reform argumen ini menjadi punya argumen punya kekuatan supporting yang lebih kuat. Nah, mungkin kita lanjutkan ke situ. Ya, Pak Smith, ya, you could going on forward.
Great. I can understand your exposition, which makes me feel very proud of how far I've come in my bahasa Indonesia. So, the trouble is with the original common consent argument for God, that most people didn't come to a belief in God all of a sudden. It's not as though a couple of weeks ago, everybody just woke up and felt in their heart, oh, I never believed in God before, but now I do. I don't know why, but it just happened, right? No, this is not what happened. Over thousands of years, proselytizing religions like Christianity and Islam spread throughout the world. So you have a lineage of storytelling. You have a lineage of transmission, whereby the belief in a God is passed down from parent to child, from teacher to student, and so on. So the belief, although it's very, very widespread, wasn't generated independently in each person. It's more like a word of mouth claim, like gossip or something like that. So the way that the belief has spread simply isn't independent. And that's a problem for any argument that says, because you have this big agreement, the belief that the agreement concerns is probably true. So there's the problem with the argument.
More like testimonial,
exactly.
Came from testimonial.
It's a testimonial belief. It's dependent on the testimony of others. And it's not as though we have a few people, mystics and so on, who say that they have had an experience of God. But generally, these people are in the overwhelming minority. And most religious believers tend to believe because of scripture or their parents or their community, and for those sorts of reasons. So that's the first big problem with the common consent argument.
I'll continue to translate. Oke, jadi teman-teman, permasalahan pertama terkait common consent argument ini adalah bahwa agama-agama besar yang ada pada umumnya, Kristen, agama-agama Samawi, itu menyebar secara testimonial dari orang ke orang. Nah, sedangkan common consent argument ini lebih berbicara soal bagaimana kita at the first time, pada saat yang pertama-tama itu punya ide mengenai Tuhan. Kan tadi Pak Tiddy Smith udah nyontohin ya, kita nggak kayak orang-orang tiba-tiba bangun tidur, tiba-tiba gue mau percaya Tuhan. Gitu. Nah, itu tidak terjadi. Nah, lalu itu yang bermasalah dari common consent argument, bahwa pada kenyataannya banyak agama-agama besar itu disebarkan secara testimonial atau dari orang ke orang. Nah, itu problem pertama. Oke, Pak, you continue.
So maybe I'll give an analogy to show why this kind of belief is less reliable than a belief or than an agreement generated independently. So imagine there is a duck on the river and 20 people claim to have seen the duck on the river, or rather, I'll change that, sorry. 20 people believe that there's a duck on the river. And they all agree, the duck, it's on the river. Now, there are two situations here to consider. In the first situation, we can imagine that everybody was standing at the side of the lake. Everybody was looking over the fence at the duck on the river. They didn't speak to each other. And they all came to believe that the duck is on the river. Now, in this case, the agreement is silent. Right? They're not talking about it. They don't know that they agree, but they do all agree. in this case, we would be happy to say that the duck was the immediate cause of all of their beliefs. Now, in the second case, we can imagine a situation in which 20 people, again, believe that the duck is on the river, but this is because one person, call him John, he was down at the river. He saw the duck, and then he went into a party with 19 people and said to them, "Oh, there's a duck out there." And so the 20 people come to believe that there is a duck on the river, but in this case, we'd say that their belief is caused by his testimony and not immediately by the duck itself. And of course, in this situation, we have a much greater chance of error. There's a much greater chance that, say, in this case, John is lying, John was hallucinating, John saw something that was a duck, a duck shooter with the fake ducks to come and bring, it could have been anything that John saw, and all of a sudden the reliability of that belief plummets. Now, in the case where everybody sees the duck, we've tested everyone's vision, everyone's eyesight against the other person's. But in the case where John goes to the party and says, "I saw a duck," there's no test. It's John's testimony, and that's it. So that's the analogy here to make this distinction between dependent belief and independent belief.
Untranslated. Oke, jadi teman-teman, ini akan bahas topik tahapan selanjutnya untuk mendukung soal animisme. Ini jadi andaikanlah bahwa di dalam sebuah taman ada kolam isinya bebek. Ada 20 orang nih ngelihat bebek. Nah, mereka nggak perlu mendiskusikan satu sama lain kan ya, untuk melihat bahwa mereka setuju itu adalah bebek. Mereka secara independen percaya bahwa itu adalah bebek. Nah, lain cerita kalau misalnya ada orang yang namanya John lihat bebek, dia pergi ke pesta, dan dia cerita ke orang-orang di pesta bahwa dia baru saja melihat bebek. Ada banyak masalah. Pertama, mungkin aja bebeknya itu bebek bohongan, gitu kan, bebek karet lah, gitu kan. Atau misalnya bebek itu halusinasinya John doang, atau berbagai hal yang lain. Jadi, dependent belief ini lebih problematis dibandingkan independent belief, yang tadi ya, 20 orang melihat bebek secara bersamaan, tanpa perlu mendiskusikan satu sama lain, tapi mereka bisa percaya bahwa itu sama-sama bebek, gitu. Nah, jadi, ini independent belief. Oke, I'll continue with you, Pak Tiddy. So, what kind of belief it is that the same with that which produce the independent belief? What kind of belief, or what kind of religion that resembles with your examples which that duck?
Okay, so what religion is the duck?
Yeah, what religion is the duck?
We want to find the duck, right? We all want to find the duck of God.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, yes, if we take independent belief seriously, which religion garners the most surprising degree of independent belief? Now, there are studies in anthropology that we can look at to find this out. Now, in one recent study by Hervé Peoples, Frank Marlowe, and Pavel Duda, they surveyed, I believe it's 34 isolated hunter-gatherer societies. Now, it's very important that the societies that we survey are isolated, because if we want to find out which religion is the duck, we need to find an example just like the people by the river, where they haven't spoken to each other, there's no collusion, there's no gossip, they haven't had a chance to get their story straight. Right? We need to find an example in which, in a sense, everybody just looked and everybody just saw the religious truth, if you like. Now, when we examine these hunter-gatherer societies and look at the contents of their religious beliefs, actually the belief in God is not quite 50%. I think it's around, you might have the numbers in front of you. I should remember things like this.
Yeah. I'll see it. 15%.
So 15% of all of the hunter-gatherer societies surveyed believed in some sort of active high God. So this is the kind of God who can summon miracles or intervene in the laws of nature, and who actually cares about us humans and what we do. I think if you add a more deistic picture of God, that number rises to about 30%. So still the minority. However, 100% of all of the hunter-gatherer societies investigated had animistic commitments in their religious beliefs. So on this view, or on this understanding of animism that the anthropologists were using, this meant that the hunter-gatherer societies and their religions accepted things like, say, waterfalls who were people, mountains who were people, rivers who were people, whales who were people, rocks who were people, and so on. Now, that is shocking.
Yeah.
It is absolutely stunning, because we are talking about, say, cultures as distant as the New Zealand Maori from the Siberian shaman, or the South American Amazonian and the West African. So we are talking dramatic isolation over 100,000 years or so. So the distance in time between these communities is immense. They have had no chance to get their story straight, right? They haven't been on the phone with each other saying, oh, tell everybody that you believe mountains are people too. They all just believe this. That's independent belief. And that's a very strong argument that the belief that you hold is accurate. And so I think the duck is animism.
Instead of bigger religion, you think these common concern arguments is supporting beliefs like animism, yeah, if I'm not, yeah. So common concern arguments supporting animism instead of other beliefs such as theism, yeah.
That particular argument, yes. So if you want a common consent argument, if you want to say something like, well, we should just believe whatever there is the most independent agreement about, yes, in that case, animism is the most successful religious view.
I'll translate it first. Okay,
yes,
jadi
yes.
Teman-teman, kepercayaan apa sih yang sifatnya independen dan tidak disampaikan melalui seperti yang dependent belief, melalui testimoni. Nah, kalau kita lihat secara antropologis, kepercayaan yang paling independen, bisa dibilang begitu, adalah kepercayaan-kepercayaan yang ada di dalam kelompok-kelompok yang terisolasi. Misalnya, tadi diberikan contoh orang-orang Maori yang ada di New Zealand, kan? Mungkin orang-orang Papua di satu tempat tertentu yang juga tertutup, gitu kan? Atau di tadi Siberia, gitu. Nah, mereka kan terpisah-pisah nih, teman-teman. Tapi mereka semua punya satu kepercayaan yang resembles each other atau sama dengan yang lain, yaitu terkait animisme. Dan kalau di papernya 100%, 34 kelompok yang diteliti itu 100% percaya animisme. Percaya sama active high gods itu cuma 15%, percaya high gods itu cuma 35%. Tapi animisme ini yang semuanya bisa dapat kepercayaan tersebut. Jadi menarik banget kita melihat bahwa meskipun mereka terpisah-pisah, tapi semua punya satu kepercayaan yang sama. Meskipun mereka nggak bisa ngomong satu sama lain. So that's the interesting case. Nah, now another questions, I think almost the last. What would an atheist say if they heard about this argument?
That's a...
Especially the someone who believes in evolutions. What
Yeah.
can I say?
I think that's a great question, actually, because generally speaking, atheists are not just atheists. Usually, they also incorporate into their belief system a great deal of anti-supernaturalism in general. Right? So somebody who calls themselves an atheist, at least, is very often committed to the non-existence of supernatural things. But it's difficult to say that what the animist believes is anything supernatural. If you say that the animist believes in spirits, right? Roh. If you say that the animist believes in some kinds of roh, some types of hantu, then I think that's an easy case, because I think atheists by and large would probably say, wow, we don't believe in all that rubbish, gods and ghosts and spirits and all that. But if all the animist is saying is that there exists some people who you haven't been treating like people,
I see.
Well, that's nothing supernatural.
I see.
But it is a challenge to the typical sort of Western Enlightenment view that the atheist is often an atheist because of. Now, for this reason, I don't know what the reaction of most atheists would be to this argument. If you accept a relatively sensible view according to which, say, the animist merely thinks that some stones are people, this isn't supernatural. When I was a child, I had a pet rock. I bought it from a fair. It had a little face painted on it. I named it. I took it everywhere with me. Sure, my belief was different to many other people around me who didn't believe that it was a person. But how we decide this question, that's a tangle. That's going to be a really messy problem.
So animism is not that really supernatural, if I'm not wrong. It's not.
Some interpretations are not supernatural at all. In fact, the majority of the interpretations in the social anthropological literature are not very supernatural.
I see. Okay, it's really interesting. Okay, but the time is ticking, and I need to continue for the last questions. It's okay.
Do you want to translate that? Sorry.
Okay, Jadi teman-teman, kepercayaan dari animisme ini kan tadi gue nanya ya, orang-orang ateis gimana nih kalau dengar argumen ini? Buat ateis itu kan nggak mereli ateis ya, tapi mereka itu punya semacam anti supernatural gitu, nggak percaya terhadap keberadaan akan yang supernatural. Nah, tetapi animisme ini bagi sebagian banyak antropolog sosial itu bukan satu kepercayaan yang sifatnya supranatural. Tetapi ada semacam sosok manusia yang lain yang mungkin tidak berupa seperti kita, dan kita tidak perlakukan mereka sesuai dengan apa yang seharusnya kita perlakukan. Nah, jadi animisme bukan kepercayaan yang sifatnya lebih supranatural bagi sebagian orang yang interpretasinya sebagai demikian. Okay, Pak Tiddy Smith, the last questions, are there any ethical implications if animism is true? Because I think one of the reasons for humans exploiting our nature, jungle lake, etc., is the lack of appreciation towards nature. There's kind of a dichotomy between ourselves and nature. It makes the paper more practical for the listener here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, there are many theorists of animism who believe that this is the case, that the ethical implications of taking animism seriously are not just important, but almost necessary if we want to avoid, say, global environmental disaster or something like this. So I'm not 100% sold on that, and I'll explain why. I think there's a sort of view that people can easily fall into of a sort of ecological noble savage view of animistic belief and so-called primitive peoples. Now, I think the problem is it's not going to be animism alone that can avert global environmental disaster or anything like that, because what we mean by animism will differ from person to person, in the sense that you have to take some things as people and some things as non-people. So some things are persons, some things are not persons. Let's say my flavor of animism takes fire to be a person and grasslands to be non-persons, or forests to be non-persons. Well, then when I see a fire destroy a forest, I'll be rejoicing. I'll be saying, oh, the fire is so happy today. It's gotten to eat that delicious forest that we don't care about. So,
I see.
So it really depends. Of course, most societies have tended to take features of the environment that are ecologically important and economically important as being persons. So it does tend to, in fact, be the case that in these animist societies you have forests and food sources and things like this being treated as persons. At the same time, I think we have to be careful in examining exactly how it is that animism might provide protection for, say, the environment. And ultimately, I think all this boils down to is how much we value the environment, whether or not we take it to be a person. So I'm not so sure that animism is the silver bullet that so many people take it to be.
Oke. Ya, jadi teman-teman, sebenarnya tadi kan gue nanya ya soal bagaimana sih, apakah animisme ini punya implikasi etis gitu terkait kita memperlakukan lingkungan. Ya, kita harus hati-hati kata Pak Tiddy Smith, karena ya yang namanya animisme ini bukan peluru yang bisa langsung menyelesaikan berbagai masalah gitu. Karena permasalahan environment ini memang mungkin berkaitan sedikit lebih dengan animisme, tapi nggak sedemikian langsung gitu. Tapi ya anyway, itu yang bisa kita usahakan sih, bukan cuma soal animismenya doang gitu. Okay, maybe last questions. So we could conclude that not only some theism or monotheism or the bigger religions that has arguments, but also animism, even for metropolitan people like us who lives in Jakarta, always seen animism kind of, what is that? I mean, so at the end time, I think we need to conclude that animism also has supporting arguments or justifications. Yeah.
I think that's right. I'd also like to emphasize, though, if this is the last word, that there's not ultimately a conflict between animism and theism, or animism and atheism. So one can be an atheist and an animist, or one can be a theist and an animist. So it's not a direct challenge in that sense to either theism or atheism. It's rather a tangential sort of challenge. It challenges both atheists and theists to reconsider what we might count as a valid cultural viewpoint about personhood, about religion, and about ultimate value.
Okay, thank you, Pak Tiddy Smith. There are some questions, but I think the time is ticking, so we need to end up this discussion as fast as possible. So yeah, maybe Christensen, you can email it. Christensen from your pragmatism class, yeah, he's here.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Maybe you could ask him personally at at your class ya. Yeah, I think there are some philosophy UI ya who joined this discussion ya.
Yes.
Okay. And we're really thankful and we're really grateful for the opportunity to interview you, Pak Tiddy Smith.
No,
So
anytime.
Yeah.
It's been great fun. This was very fun, actually.
Yeah. I will post this video, this recorded in Instagram. Yeah, if you have Instagram, you can access it in Instagram. Yeah. So teman-teman, I'll speak in Indonesia. Teman-teman, jadi kita bisa akhirin diskusi ini. Jadi kita bersyukur banget punya orang yang keren gitu, maksudnya dari Otaku Uni, dan dia bisa diskusin soal animisme. Dan tadi terakhir, penutup penting juga, kita nggak perlu mengkonflikkan antara animisme dengan teisme, atau animisme dengan ateisme, karena seorang teis bisa menjadi seorang animis, dan seorang ateis bisa menjadi animis. Gitu. Jadi nggak perlu kita konflikin satu sama lain. So, yeah, that's it, teman-teman. Kalau teman-teman punya pertanyaan langsung, boleh mungkin email ke gua, dan akan aku tanyakan ke Pak Tiddy Smith juga sih. Kalau memang ada pertanyaan dari teman-teman. If there's some questions, I'll email it. Boleh. Oke. And gue bakal post di Twitter juga tweet. I'll post the tweet about your paper, Pak Tiddy Smith.
Oke, terima kasih.
Oke, terima kasih teman-teman. We'll see you later. Thank you, Pak Tiddy Smith. Hopefully there are any other opportunity for us to speak like this. Okay, Pak Tiddy Smith, thank you for your opportunity. I'll end this discussion.
Okay.